everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm glad to be here. We'll be discussing a topic that's near and dear to my heart, melees. We've decided tonight that melees is such a large topic that we're going to narrow it down to not wars. So this will be the smaller melees that you might have at home, maybe barony on barony, group on group, 5 on 5s, 10s on 10s. Tonight we have Sir Pellinore, who is the general of the Mid-Realm Army and spear god. And as he says, his weapon form of choice is spear and army. Sir Bari, who again is one of our great spear fighters of the known world. And Viscount Tristan, who you all know and love. Thank you guys for joining us on the show tonight.
Great to be here.
One of the things that happens at Pennsic, and I know I said Pennsic, and tonight we're supposed to be talking about smaller melees, but here in Eldamere and in the Mid and in kingdoms sort of surrounding wherever Pennsic takes place, we tend to use Pennsic rules of engagement. And now, while we are not anxious and waiting for battles to start and worried if we got to go pee before the battle starts and wish you hadn't drunk quite as much, I'd like to remind everybody, a little PSA as it were, of the rules of engagement. Now, these rules of engagement are the rules that we use here in Eldamere, the Mid, probably the Eastern Callantyre, although I can't swear to it. And I just think that it would be a good idea to remind you. These are published in Pennsic, and as I say, we use them here at home. Other wars will have different conventions. Different kingdoms, for example, have death from behind, but we don't. So with fighter engagements, this is a quote from the Pennsic handbook. Before you strike your opponent, you must make them aware of your presence and intent by gaining engagement. This happens when you have made eye contact with your opponent and they have acknowledged you as a threat by reacting in some way, either by going on guard, like, oh my God, you're going to swing at me, or by swinging at you. We want to make sure that both people know that these are two fighters engaging, that you don't, for example, have a marshal standing there and you just turn and immediately swing on the person right there. It could be somebody saying, hey, there's a dangerous situation. With siege engines, all fighters are engaged with siege engines at all times during a battle. Not probably as likely to happen in your kingdoms or interbaronies, but maybe you're practicing siege. What do I know? So all fighters engage with siege engines at all times during a battle, no matter which way they are facing. So, shit, if you get hit by your own guys in the back, sucks.
Done that.
Yeah. Combat archery. So it starts off, this is the quote, targeting the back of an individual, a lone or organized unit is prohibited. However, a cluster of folks may be targeted within 180 degrees of the direction of the group as a whole is facing, and a rearward facing opponent shot thusly should accept the strike. This applies equally for an opponent who is rotated after release. The actual specific targeting of the backside of any individual is prohibited. So now that, now it's a calm and quiet time, I thought we should start with what the heck are the rules of engagement up here at least. As a reminder, I know that some of you tonight are from big melee households. Please feel free to ask your questions or make your comments. Tell us how your households handle this kind of stuff, for lack of a better term. We'd like to be able to, maybe we can pick up things, and share with the group. So that's important to us. So tonight we're talking about individual practices and how do you start with individual practices. So this is a subject I know that's near and dear to Barry's heart. So Barry, I'm just going to say some stuff and you feel free to respond to them. This will sound very similar to everything that you posted into our group chat. So he will be discussing the following things. How do you organize a practice and when and where? What days of the week? Are they weekly? Are they monthly? Do you do them just leading up to like melee season? Can you do them in the off months? How do you set up the field and what's safe? Who's in charge and who decides how the day goes? So Barry, would you like to talk about these subjects?
Yeah, I'll throw in a little bit on there. I was posting the questions. I didn't say I had the answers. But yeah, let's start off with something simple, and then the other guys can, the other people can sort of chime in too, or you yourself as well. But yeah, to start off with, like when do you have the practices? So I think a big thing with that is, so there's a couple of things you have to balance. Is the more often you have the practices, you start cutting into the number of people that show up to each practice. So, for example, if you said, hey, let's have a melee practice 3 times a week, unless you have like a bunch of really enthusiastic college students or something, I don't think you're going to get a whole lot of people to show up. I know in the East, we have a regional practice that we have about once a month. And then we start trying to squeeze in other practices where we can, and maybe locations that are a couple hours away from there to maybe pick up a couple other people. We just started one. My friend, the Honorable Lady Tegan, just started one in the Baltimore area that she's sort of bringing in the fringes of Ethelmark and the East and Atlantia, having a multi-kingdom practice there, because again, you don't usually have regional practices at the edge of a kingdom. So a lot of times those people don't make it out there. And you also have to worry about cutting into singles practices. So some people might be gearing up for Crown, gearing up for a big tourney, Candlemas, something like that. And they can't make it out there. So that's the big thing, is just sort of trying to balance out exactly, how often can you have them such that you don't start having diminishing, people coming in. So that's a thought I have there. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to throw into it.
Yeah, Pelly, you come from a big fighting group. What do you got to say about this?
When back in the early 2000s, we had a pretty good fight practice once a week. That's when about 25 to 30 guys could get together on a Friday night just about every week. And we got really good. Other than that, like Barry said, it's tough to balance time. One thing we did to address singles was we would start out with the first about half an hour doing just all singles, because that eventually helps your melee fighting also, and then we transition into melee. But for the most part, a good what I've seen is a lot of places will have at least one a month. It seems like everybody can schedule one good melee practice a month. At least that's what I have seen. And then you might have a couple of them in within a couple hours radius that you can hit as an individual or as a 2 or 3 man team.
Tris?
Yeah, thanks. For those groups that can get together practices of 20, 30 fighters, that's really super awesome. And I'm sure that within our audience, we've got quite a few who maybe have smaller practices. Maybe you get 7 or 8 people, or 9 people, or even maybe 5. You're like, okay, well, how do you tackle learning melee skills when there's not many of you, or perhaps you don't have a somewhat seasoned experienced melee fighter in there, and you're kind of thinking, well, we want to do this, want to learn to do some melee, but how do we get started? And so I think some of the things we're going to cover within this discussion, keep in mind, are going to be fairly scalable. You don't have to have 20 to 30 fighters at your practice to actually learn some decent melee fundamentals. Back when I first got into it and learned melee, we had, I'd say, maybe average somewhere between 7 and maybe 10 or 12 fighters at a practice. And we've just found great fun with, all right, let's just start with 4. Let's just do 3-on-3s or 4-on-4s and just go. And it's kind of without the discipline of having some experienced people to teach you, it's kind of like just jumping into the pool to learn how to swim. But it's not that bad of a way to go if you don't have anything else. My advice is, don't let the fact that you don't have a mentor or somebody there to guide your practice to keep you from at least trying. At least do up a couple small groups and just say, hey, let's run some of these. They go fast. They're a lot of fun. It doesn't need to stop you if you don't have access to a large like a regional practice or something of that nature.
Agreed. As an aside, Tristan, you have told a story sort of in our leading up to it, although not tonight, about groups of you and your friends once going to melees. And as I recall, you were like, let's just try all this dumb shit and see what happens. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. And it started, there was a pre-Penzic season many years ago, and the mid-realm general at the time just said, all right, I want everybody to organize into four-person teams. Basically, he called them lances, and just practice. And my friends and I, coincidentally, there were four of us, just said, all right, we're going to show up to practice. And about the last half hour or 45 minutes, because up until that time it was all singles, just said, all right, we're going to go out and we're just going to face anybody. We're just going to fight together, and that's it. We just did it. And because we did it and we were focused on it, and we had one of the fighters was played football in high school. And he's like, okay, I think we can kind of work together here. We'll figure this out. And we started doing it, and within about, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks, we got to the point where we just say, all right, we'll start with 4, but then we did well with 4. So all right, so bring 5 people out here, bring 6, bring everybody else doesn't want to rest. Bring them out and we'll face them. And it didn't take that long before just things like staying together, stay moving, have a lead person that you all rally to, make sure your capital weapons get in the fight, that they're not out of range. They're trying to catch up with shields. Just little things like that worked out really well. And then the other big one, and I remember this, and this was an event between, it was an Armageddon. So it was a small interkingdom war thing between North Shield and Callantyr. And I remember one time, and it got to be pretty big. I mean, there was probably, I remember there was this bridge set up where we had 3 bridges. Each one looked like about 20 or 25, 30 fighters on each bridge. So we had probably overall 100, a little over 100 fighters, 125 maybe. And we just decided, our little household did, which showed up with about 10, 12 people. It's like, you know what we're going to do today? Column charges. We're just going to get really good at column charges. And we just kept doing it because it was a res battle. So we'd go and column charge and column charge and column charge and column charge to figure out, okay, what works, what doesn't. We kind of treated it just like a practice. So that's where we sort of came up with the theory that everything's a practice and then everything's the real deal. You don't practice like you're screwing around and just, you don't care. But when you're out doing the real thing, you're looking at it like, all right, we're going to probably make some mistakes, but how do we make it better? And just that afternoon, one Saturday afternoon, we learned so much about column charges. Like it was one of the greatest laboratories we did.
So I like the fact that you guys were just like, hey, you know what? We're just going to try stuff. We don't know what we're doing, but we know what a column charge is. So we're gonna do the thing that we know.
Yep.
One of the things that when we do melee practices here at home is, I'm an old experienced melee fighter, and really I'm just an old fighter at this point. And one of the things we try to do is encourage our younger fighters to take the point, to be the leader for this set of fights, whatever this one is. So we say, okay, and we'll say to our newer fighters, okay, you invent the plan. And they're like, I have no idea what to do. And that's okay. It's okay to say, I don't know what to do. Can you give me some ideas? And it's okay when you're at practices, thinking and talking about what you're going to do is as important as executing the thing that you're going to do. So one of the things I know that we try to do with our newer fighters when they don't know what they're doing is we say, well, let's look at our weapon forms and let's look at their weapon forms. And what do we think would work? And they're like, and our new people say, well, they have shields. And I'm like, yes, they have shields. Do we have shields? We have 1 shield. Okay, so maybe going shield on shield when there's 1 shield against 5 shields isn't the thing to do. And you can help your fighters, your newer fighters, and coach them and bring them along that way. But what I just said was, if they were like 5-on-5, 5-on-5 is a weapon, is a larger, small unit. So let's go right down. Pelly, can you tell us what is the smallest unit that you think is effective? Is it 2 people working together? And if so, what is the combination, or does the weapon combination of 2 people working together matter?
Well, I like a 3-man group, what they would call a triad in the East, because it's just so flexible. You can do two a pole and two shields. You can do a pole, a shield, and a spear. And the weapons mix really depends on the people that you have and what they're good at. There's some people that are really good at spear, so stick them in there and with either two shields or a shield and a pole. If you have somebody that's better at a pole, go with a pole and two shields. Or even if you have two people that are really good at pole, go with one shield. And just stay mobile. So it really depends on the people you have with you. That's a big thing that you have to look at as far as your weapons mix. But I like a 3-man for the flexibility and for the movement that you can get out of that.
So you would say for you, what you think is that the smallest workable or usable would be a 3-fighter group. Barry, what are your thoughts on this?
I think one fighter can be very effective.
All right, talk to me about a 1-fighter melee team, man. You got my ears.
Yeah, I don't want to be contrarian here.
You just joined the team. You go right ahead.
Yeah, no, well, it depends. If we're talking about inserting a group of people into a melee, it depends on the size of the melee. One person. If you've got a 10-on-10, like one of the things that I, sometimes I'll be the person when they say, okay, we're all going to go right. And I know that in our area, a lot of times what happens is when you go right, both units decide they're going to go right and sort of hit each other's flanks. And sometimes if you just stick one person to float off on the left, you can really drag out that whole flank and really slow them up. So, I mean, there's an example of something that one person can do. Something that as I'm getting more experienced, which now I'm coming up on 29, 30 years or something like that, but I'm still learning things. And one of the things I'm starting to really learn as I'm starting to teach a lot of newer people is that what I'm capable of and what Bess and probably all the people in this call are capable of is maybe not what most people with less than 30 years experience are capable of. So you probably wouldn't take your new fighter and throw them off on the left, because there's going to be a little bit of a wisdom and understanding how to do that. And I would say most fighters, if you told them to do that, hey, you're going to be on the left and slow these guys up, they're probably either going to stand there, get run over, or they're going to plow right into that unit, which often is even worse because then they just die faster. And then that unit sort of comes around. Now you're down a person. So that's sort of my thought on that. I actually wanted to go back on one thing, and we talked about just throwing people out there and just getting into it. One of the things I've found that I think people don't value enough is just experience. Just time in the helmet is so important. And I don't want to go into Tristan's world too much, but I did take a karate class for like a month or something. But one of my friends went on and he eventually got his black belt in, and he told me how the classes were run there. And they had like a pretty good tournament team, and they had, I think, sparring was like every Friday. And once a week, if you were really interested in it, you could show up and spar. And that kind of got people prepared for the tournament. And that was once a week. Well, in our sport, we're lucky if we get together once a week for a melee. And so people think like, okay, like we're together. What should we do? Well, let's get together and start going through our katas, and then we'll do some drills. We'll do this stuff. And they're sort of neglecting the fact that like it's, if you only get in 15 minutes of actual sparring in melee, once a week or once a month, I don't think that's enough. So I just want to drive home the point that people fighting and starting to learn and get experience and starting to see how things move and making those mistakes and hopefully learning from mistakes. And as Bess said, I'm a big fan of like letting them out there and do that, and then give them a little bit of guidance. Let that spear on the flank get run over 2 or 3 times and say, hey, this really isn't the kind of weapon that's going to stop that really experienced shield person that keeps running you over. So,
Tris, your group was you were asked to do 4 fighters at one go. The quad or whatever they said. What do you think is the smallest building block of a melee team?
Well, of a melee team, it would be 1. And as I was listening to both these guys, it occurred to me. And I remember way back my first melee, first Pennsic, or first big melee would have been Pennsic. I did some other ones too, but remembering how I felt like I needed to be glued right next to the person next to me. And I remember, as I got more experience, I started thinking, okay, I can have a little bit of space. And then you get to like what Barry's talking about. You're the one on the left alone, kind of out maybe 15 feet away from the line of the rest of your guys, but you're still part of that unit. You're not by yourself. If you think you're by yourself, it doesn't matter if you're 2 feet away from your team or 20 feet away. You're kind of useless. You're not really part of that team. But if you have the experience to be able to float out 20 feet, but you still act as part of that group, then you are a valuable part of that team. And so as people that are listening to this, maybe they're starting out, maybe they're just getting into melee, or maybe they've done it for a year or two and realize like, oh yeah, I now feel like I can be a few feet away from my teammates and I still feel connected to them. Like I'm not going to just ignore what they're doing. I get so focused on my opponent that the rest of the team goes some other direction and I'm left here hanging, that's a good learning tool. You get run over as a spear because you got lost out in the field because you weren't paying attention to what your team was doing or double checking on them. But if you have that, if you can kind of expand your zone of influence, and it's not just about having like a pole weapon or a spear. There are shield fighters that have only got a sword length range, but if they stray out into a field, they control that area. And they're doing that for their team, either to stabilize a flank or maybe influence and peel a group off. And this is learning there's more to melee than just laying a stick on somebody's helmet. By how you place yourself, even as a solo fighter or as two, if you start to move around and you can get a whole line to start backing up because they're afraid you're going to come around beside them, you may not be throwing any blows, but you are certainly influencing how that engagement's happening. You're manipulating that team. And I remember years ago, Jafar doing this at one of the first Warlords and Warriors days, is he would go off by himself. Of course, he was a count, a 2-stick fighter, very hot. And teams would send 5 or 6 people after him, and he'd just run them out in the field and just keep running. And by the time he brought them all back, the rest of their team was mostly dead, or they had been dead, and they now face the bulk of the rest of the team. So he was a useful tool in that way because he drew off and split up the whole other side, even though he never had to lay a stick on anybody.
And actually, I will affirm that. So up here we have some really big melee events during the summer months. And one of my Swear Brothers talks, they were 10 on 10s. And like Jafar, we were engaged. And for some reason, they wanted to kill Bess. And so 10 on 10s, they sent about 4 guys. That's 40% of the team after me. If I had planted and fought them, I might have died quickly or may have lasted a little longer. I may have killed one of them, but all I did was back up down the field. I at times, if they thought that they would disengage, I would like fake that I was going to engage them, and so that they wouldn't run back and join. Meanwhile, I had 9 guys left at the other end of the field. Now it was 9 fighting 6, right. And our guys died. And in fact, apparently, as I understand it, they killed their 6 and went, wow, what's going on? Hey, where's Bess? And oh, wait, look, there's still fighters over there. So there are things that you can do. You don't always have to be actively engaged, like actively swinging at somebody to influence the battle. So Barry, I guess this ties in with your one fighter can be is the smallest building block of
and by the way, to build the vocabulary, the word that you're looking for is skirmishing. When you harass and basically don't let yourself be ignored and you draw attention.
Exactly. You're a skirmisher, you're pulling them off. That is a term that we use up here. I don't know if that's used across the known world. I mean, I assume it is. It's a fairly common sports.
I'm sure there are other terms for it too.
But that's what we use up here. I was trying to be kind of SCA neutral, but it's skirmisher. One of the other things that you can do that we used to say a lot that I haven't heard recently, and I don't know why, it was like a mantra. You leg them and you leave them, which was to say, you hit somebody in the leg, don't stop and kill them. They're on the ground. They're not going to be running around. Go kill the highly mobile people and then come back to the people on their knees. Has this changed in some way? Because I don't hear this being said so much at melees, or I don't listen so well at melees. Any Pel?
It's I think it's still taught. I mean, we still teach that. I still tell people about that. But I think it's not expressed as much as it used to be. And I'm not sure if that's because some of the old school teachers or melee teachers are not around as much, or what, but it's still taught, uh, from what
Barry?
I've seen.
Okay, so Barry, what about you and the kingdoms you'll be fighting in internally, or some of the other kingdoms that are maybe not the for lack of a better term, the Penzic kingdom?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, legging and leaving is a big thing. It's a very critical rule. I find some of the worst offenders of that. I was just reviewing a video. I won't say which one it was. It was one we didn't do very well in. But I want to say, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that happens sometimes is once you start getting to the upper echelons of fighters, so we're generally talking about knights, or at least since we're talking about melee, I call them the melee knights because there are some tourney knights that are not particularly great at melee. And sometimes they start throwing the rules out because they think like, oh, I can get a quick, easy kill on this person. And I've seen some in some of like the belted champions or even the unbelted champions or some of our top level unbelts. They'll get stuck trying to fight a legged fighter. And you're like, yeah, you're used to your local practice where you're the best person there, but they also made the team for their kingdom. And these guys have, or ladies have really good defense. So yeah, and I think sometimes we forget to sort of pass that down. Yeah, leg them and leave them. I don't think there's any exceptions for that, other than weapon style. If they're an archer or a spear, that's sort of the exception to the rule. With a spear, could depend if it's a res battle. I'm going to leave Pellinore. I'm not going to kill him. I'm going to make him kill himself and go back and res. But there might be a situation where maybe Tristan's on the front line and I'm thinking, wow, he thinks he's doing a good job, but he's actually not. And he's plugging up some other good fighters behind him. So we'll leave him there. But if he starts murdering us, then we have to do our best to try to kill him. So there are some exceptions to that. But in general, yeah, leg him and leave him.
Fair enough. One of the things that I do both to, really calm me down when I'm fighting with my friends is I'm quite a vocal fighter. I tend to be a shield for my reach weapons, either a spear or a polearm beside me. I will be their eyes. I let them focus. And if I need to look around, I can throw a shield up in front of my face, look around. Oh, we've got reserves coming. So I talk a lot. I talk a lot in battles. People are coming in from the left. I see combat archery straight in front of you. I see this. What are your thoughts? Say, let's start with Tristan about talking and sharing information in a battle. Where do you stand with that? And you're muted.
Yep. Certainly, there's important information that needs to get conveyed, and usually it's to help you organize your own side. Every once in a while, there will be an opportunity where you can say something seemingly to your team, but you want the other team to hear it. That's deception, right?
Yep.
Those are fun when that stuff happens. But yeah, but you don't want to be so chattery that you're just constantly bombarding people with excess communication. But the crucial stuff that needs to be there that's really what makes a good melee leader, is to be clear. And one of the times I remember years ago, I was leading North Shield in a bridge, and Callantyr had already lost all their shields, and they pulled out, and they had some capital weapons behind, but they didn't have the shields to front them up. So we brought up our line, and I set up kind of this somewhat elaborate channel system that we could kind of go back and forth as we were getting pushed and rushed. And they saw it, and they watched it for about 10-15 minutes, and then their commander came up and said, I see how you guys are using your spears. Do you want us to feather in with you guys? Because we can see the pattern. We can see how it goes. And you can only do that when you have clear communication with your shields, your capital weapons, to organize how things flow and move. And that's the thing when your team goes out, and even doing 5-on-5s or whatever, you want to have some basic plan. If you don't have a plan and it's just like wait for the lay on and then we go, it's just going to be random. Like you're gonna win or lose purely by luck more than anything else. But even if you have a simple plan, and there's a couple that come right off the top of the head, pick number one person. Just say, I know Joe over there. Everybody go get Joe. Like that way, everybody's on your team is always going to be going the same direction. They're not going to get split off and get strayed out or distracted. Stuff like that is really super simple, but it works. And you can be hit one side, go after their capital weapon guy, take the polearm guy out first, or if they got a really strong shield fighter, like we're going to blast that shield, we're going to knock him on his ass, and then go from there, and then rally. That your plan doesn't have to be simple, and your communication doesn't have to be. You don't have to lay out George S. Patton level of strategy. You just have to have a plan and execute it, and be totally clear with what it is.
I would say that some of the most successful battle plans or melee plans that I've ever been part of are fairly simple ones that we can all remember. Because let's be honest, we all have fighter brain. We're happy, we're excited. People are throwing things at us. I can't think of, okay, we're going to do this, and then after 13 feet, we're going to do this, and then we're going to come back this way, and then we're going to sweep left. And half the people think
those things drive me nuts.
My left or their left, and then then I'm like left and right. Where am I going? And then you got. So I would say, so for new people who are looking at this, simple plans that everybody can remember and follow are frequently the most successful plans, because damn, people are coming at me 14 ways from Sunday, and I don't know where I'm supposed to be going next. Damn, I don't know what I'm doing. Barry, I don't know. I saw that you dropped off for a second there. I don't know that we led into this by saying conversation and talking and battles, sharing information. Sometimes there's too much, sometimes there's not enough. What do you look for in an exchange of information amongst fighters during a melee?
Well, real quick, I see Pellinore actually had something to add here. Do you want to jump in, or
go ahead, Bart? I'll go after you.
Okay. So, we're so up here in the East. At least in the last several years, we've been developing a culture of lots of communication during battle. Usually, we'll have a commander, but what we really want, and particularly in our practices, is we want everyone at the practice to understand what's going on in the melee, and to figure out on their own when they're comfortable just making the call, or when they're comfortable knowing that they see something and they want to go run and say something to a commander. And one of the things I think a lot of the knights around here we're pretty good at is if we see like an unbelt who's really enthusiastic about a plan, as long as it's not a terrible plan, we'll just let them run it. We'll be like, okay, tell everyone what to do, like you be in charge. But yeah, we're very big in, and again, you guys use this phrase, I think, in the last video, see something, say something. That's a very big thing. So that one of the big things I've been trying to teach with the spears is, and this is a very specific thing, but for example, if we have static line battles, typically, for anyone that doesn't know this, typically you either have your shields in the front or you have your spears in the front. You might have some sort of mix in there, but oftentimes they'll say shields up or spears up. And a lot of times what happens is when we say spears up, the spears walk up and the shields don't move out of the way. And so they stand there. They're like, well, I don't have anywhere to go. And Bess is making a look right now because you don't see who's behind you. So when they say spears up, the shields don't just say like, all right, we're going to turn around and walk away now. Like you have to wait until someone comes up to take your spot. So we've been working on that sort of communication. That's one that I haven't quite figured out how to teach yet. But yeah, so those are some ideas.
Pal, what would you like to add to this?
Like when I'm fighting in a line, I enjoy my shieldman or whoever's around me pointing out openings that are coming up or that did happen. And if somebody said something to me, I'm always saying, oh, thank you, just so they know that I understand what they said. And even if I get it, and that's usually with people that I know, if I get into a line with shieldmen that I don't know, I've never fought with before, I'll sometimes just tell them, hey, watch that side or watch that side and let me know what's going on. Just real quietly. When it comes to like a 2-man, 3-man, 5-man team, 10-man team, communication is key. Talking, because even if a pole or a spear wants to move one spot over, they need to tell those shieldmen in front of them that that's what's happening. Otherwise, they'll leave a gap that could be taken advantage of by the other side. So what I'll do and what I've seen other people do is they'll kind of move their spear up a little bit. I'm moving to the left, or I'm moving to your right, and then they'll move over. And that communication is important, so that they know that they're going to be vulnerable for a half a second or something, or they can cover it while you're moving. As far as if a spear is coming up to the line, they should come up and say spear up, spear coming in, spear entering the line, something, so the shieldmen up there or the other people up there know that you're coming from behind, and they can open up for you a little bit, or whatever they need to do to let you in. And I think that is something, Barry, that you can instruct people, spears or poles or whomever that has to get through the line. They need to say something to them that they're coming up to them, to go through or to get in the line. That would probably help a lot.
Yeah. Go ahead, Barry.
Can I follow that? Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I think sometimes, so part of what this episode's about is we're talking about how do we practice this stuff. And sometimes you need to start with very simple things. Like one of the things I've learned. So what Pellinore just said there, I'm going to try to take a mental note on that one, to just give something as simple as spear up. One of the things we've been doing in our practices is something as simple as when you come up to join a line, or whenever you're done with your engagement, you just start yelling your team name. So team names a lot of times will be red and blue or pink or Wolverines or something like that. And sometimes you get in the practice, just like, even if you come back from res point, you're just yelling, blue, 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 just to get used to the communication. And one of the things, sorry, I'm reading the comments here.
Yeah, we all giggled when we read that.
Yeah. Hi, John. No, one of the things that we do, and I encourage you guys to go back and practice this. Unless you're going to fight us, then don't practice this. Is I like to do like a spear drill. If you ever have 6 spears at a practice, you can get a spear line going. So you have 3-on-3. We'll do it as a resurrection battle. Usually one line kind of gets pushed close to the res point, so we might have a don't go beyond the end of this line sort of thing, and let them sort of regroup and res. But one of the things I actually learned from a guy up here, Sir Simon, had given this recommendation. When they come back from the res point, they are required to enter on one side or the other. So we pick a side. We'll say, if you come back from res point, you're always required to enter from the left side. Oh. And that does 2 things. One is it keeps them from going like, all right, what'd you do today, Barry? Well, every time I died, I came back and I wanted to kill Pellinore because he just killed me. So I kept coming back to the same spot. And really, we just spear dueled the whole day. So it requires to get people, it forces people to get used to like that sort of rotating in. And the thing I found that was really good with is it forced spears to talk and tell people that they're up there. Because the first several times I ran this drill, they would just stand on the side and wait for the other spears to realize they're there and to move over. And I would teach them, I'd say, okay, what you're going to do when you die, you come back to the left and you say the words, dude, move over. You could say any phrase, but just you give them the words. One of the things I learned back when I was a high school teacher, like just, don't leave it too open-ended. Tell them what to say. And if they say something different, it's just as good. You let them do that, but just give them something simple to do.
Here with our local group, we all know each other, of course. We've been here, we've been fighting each other. Most of us are squire brothers and sisters together. When we have a melee, we're separated. We've got to come back together. It's hard to know if this person running at you, who they are, or if they're coming up from behind. So as Barry says, yell at everybody. Many people up here, for example, know me. So I'll just yell, it's Bess, 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 because that also helps. If I do end up, if there are fighters who've joined us from, say, or I'm paired up with a barony that I may not know, they may not know me so well. So by saying it's Bess, they have a name that they can use. They can talk to me. They can address me, Bess, move left or move right, as opposed to, yo, dude. They're like, I don't know if you're talking to me or not. So one of the things we really want to do with this episode is talk to people and to people watching and say, how do you structure your practices here at home? So you're at home, you've got smaller groups, as melee season is coming. You might have, 4 people on each side. can you give an example, say, Tris, of how you think 4 people with some weird ass combination? You probably everybody got you got like 2 shields, a spear, and a Florentine guy. Like, so what are you gonna do with this? You got some weird combination, and everybody else is like sword and shield because they thought it was singles practice tonight. So now what the hell? So what do you do in a situation like that?
Yeah, usually when you start doing some like, okay, let's do some small unit melee stuff, and somebody shows up with a buckler, another one with a bastard sword, and you're like, okay, people, let's let's get serious. First thing is, of course, if that's all they have, then you work with it. And the buckler guy could represent somebody that had his arm taken, and all he's got is a single sword. You can still influence a battle because you can place yourself somewhere, and you can be a threat to a lone spearman. So you want to use that, but that's also an education point of saying, I respect that you love your bastard sword or your great sword, and not to insult any Callantyri who love their melee great swords and they're deadly with them, but to say, when you're going to go into a melee, here are some of the better weapons forms to have. Like your little 18-inch heater shield, that ain't the one to go with, or 20-inch round or something like that. You don't need a war shield, but get a decent size shield that you can still protect yourself with. Stay away. This is just me. Leave the Danish axes and that sort of stuff for specialty applications, but go with pole arms. I like the 7.5 footers myself if they're legal in your area, but 6 footers, spears. And I was one of those who, up until about a dozen people on a side, I would avoid having spears unless you had a specific, like you were going into a bridge or some sort of limited front type of engagement. But other than that, once you get whatever weapon combination you have, and you might have to punt with some weird stuff, that's fine. Say, okay, what are we going to do with this team? And maybe we're just going to run 4-on-4s or 3-on-3s. Usually the goofier your weapon mix, the more mobile you have to be. You do not want to go run up and go toe to toe with a well-equipped team that's got war shields or even larger tournament shields, with your Madus and your axes and shit like that. But just run them. I mean, it only takes a minute to run a 3-on-3, 4-on-4, like less than a minute. If it takes you 30 seconds, you're probably running around way too much.
You're exhausted.
And then you find out where the goofy weapons get you in a melee engagement. And it's better to find that stuff out at a local practice, a small one, than out at Pennsic or Estrella or Gulf Wars or something like that. But in those lessons, you'll always get them. You're always going to find out kind of what works and what doesn't. And the big one being, stick together. Don't wander off or get separated. And I'm kind of hoping Barry pipes in with what he would recommend for a regrouping drill, because this is probably one of the skills that is the most overlooked. Now, how do you practice regrouping? Find your people and get back together with them quickly. Rather than wandering around looking for strays to go kill, or people that are legged.
So I'm going to reframe I feel like I'm at work. I'm going to reframe your statement. Sure. So assuming that you've got your team and you're scattered around, what then? Is that what
work say, by the way?
So Barry, you've got a team. It's all scattered. Now, what the hell do they do? So you're new, because I remember this. I was very excited. I authorized back in the old days. I think I authorized in July, and I went to my very first Pennsic, and I saw the knights, and they were fighting. It was the belted champions, and to this day I can still remember the awe I felt. There was this big clusterfuck, and one guy went, I don't know what the hell's going on. And I watched this knight, no idea who he is, but he lives in my mind to this day. He backed out. I watched him back out, and he looked around, and he assessed the field, and he ran to a friend. I thought, oh my God, you can do that? You can just, when you're in a clusterfuck and you're getting dumped on, you can just back out. It was an eye opener, and I never knew you could do that. So Barry, what have you got? You got a group, they're scattered. Now what the hell?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that, and I actually also like to answer the same question that I asked Tristan earlier. But that one, okay, so the easy one is just lots of experience. Okay, lots of different varieties of drills. And then, as you said earlier, Bess.
So wait, you said lots of experience, but experience doing what? Because if you're new to it, you go, I don't know. Barry told me to get some practice. You must study more on this.
Right. Well, you know, yeah.
Don't Fuzashi on me.
No, I do have an answer. I do have an answer, okay. But I do have a specific answer. But like I said, lots of experience, meaning going to lots of melee practices. You know, and again, if you're that new person, then ask the question at the melee practice. If no one is addressing it, then certainly say, hey, how do I reform? What do I do to reform? And hopefully somebody will address that with you. As a teacher, that's certainly something you need to be looking for. Are the reforms, and again, a variety of different scenarios. Now, one scenario specifically that we've done, and he gave me crap for not giving him credit before, so I will give Count Ryu, who was the king of the East, came up with this one. I don't know if he stole it from somebody, but I will give him credit. And he knighted me, so I will always say nice things about him from now on, which is sort of a curse, I guess. But no, what we do is, okay, so you have two teams. Okay, random teams, and you put different color tape on their helmets, so a red team and a blue team, and we get them in a circle facing away from each other, and then you call lay on, and it's a single death res battle or a single death field battle, and you have to turn around and figure out who's on your team and who's not on your team, and you sort of run and regroup. And there's a couple ways you can do this. One is you can I think somebody might be coming over soon. I might have to address that soon. But anyway, so one way is like you could do it and do the same thing a couple times. So at least they get the chance of like, oh, the first time I turned and I totally ran into the two shields with my one spear. I'll try to do something different this time. And you do that enough times and then maybe like remix it again. On that note, a quick way to do that is I like to divide up teams very quickly. I'll say, if you're born before June 1, this team, after June 1, that team. If you're born on an odd day, this team, even day, that team. If your age is odd, this team. If your age is even, that team, or birth year or whatever. So you can do that. So that's a good way to do that. And if I can address the question that you asked Tristan, which is like, what would you do if you had 4-on-4? I actually had a lot of experience with that. I picked up a bunch of guys at Drexel University, and we had weekly practices there, and we would often have about 4-on-4. So a couple of things I like. Number one, I prefer to make it a 5-on-3 or a 4-on-3. Once you get to the small numbers, especially when you have 3-on-3, I really like making it 3-on-2 because that forces the groups to work together. When you have even numbers, a lot of times they break off into singles. So I like that. Something you recommended, Bess, in the last one is throw in some resurrections in there so you can sort of stretch things out. My favorite scenarios are broken field res battles. So I will bring rope and just make a bit boundary, and I might just throw like one rope in the middle. That's your obstacle you have to go around. And usually we'll go for 3 lives. In the East, we say 3 Marios. So if you ever played Mario Brothers, after the 3rd Mario's dead, then you're out. So they're always like 3 lives or 3 resurrections. How do we do this? Anyway, so broken field. And the thing I like that, especially for new fighters, is they come back they go to the res point and they come back. And they have to make their first melee tactical decision. Do I go left and join up with these people? Or do I go right and join up with these people? And they have to think about it. And they're like, well, this person has a spear and they have a shield, but that's the really good shield. And they have to think about that stuff. And it slows it down just enough to get them to work that stuff out. I like that one. I'll give you 2 more.
No, this is terrific. I'm taking good notes.
Another one I like is I call it Orcs and Goblins. No one has picked up on this phrase, but I call it Orcs and Goblins. And you basically take your 8 people there. If the talent works out right, if you can do a 3-on-5, your 3 Uber Dukes versus the 5 new fighters. And I remember the first time I ran that, I was expecting people not to like it. And it turned out we did our like little breakdown beer and pizza afterwards. And that was everyone's favorite battle. Because that one, especially of new fighters are often used to being support people. They're the first people to die, and they let the knights and the dukes go around and kill everybody. But when they're all new fighters and you even out the team so that they're going to win half the time, somebody has to get the kills. It's going to be one of them. And they really like that. They like taking ownership of figuring out the tactics. They're not afraid. At least the most experienced person in their group is not afraid to say something stupid that the knight or whomever is going to. Even if they're a nice person, they might think like, "Oh, I'm embarrassed to come up with this bad idea." No, they have no choice. One of them has to come up with the idea. So what I said, resurrection, broken field battles, making your teams uneven, making the teams with all the best fighters on one team and all the worst fighters on the other team, or I like to say experience versus less experience. And then the last one, this is a big one. This works out, especially if you have 5 fighters. It's called a 2-on-2 endless resurrection battle. And what you do is I've learned you have to put like some sort of boundary so they don't just run all over the field. So I usually bring like a big piece of rope and make like a giant circle. And it's a 2-on-2 fight. It's going to take a while to explain this. It's a 2-on-2 fight. The 5th person is out of bounds and they're waiting at a res point. Okay, as soon as one person dies, oh my God, I'm not mirroring myself here. As soon as one person dies, they go back to the res point and join up with a new team of 2. So now you have a 1, 2, and 2. Everybody is only on the team that they're paired up with, or if the person dies, they're by themselves. So at this point, you have 2 versus 2 versus 1. There is no joining up new teams. There's no stopping. As soon as 2 new people come in, they go right in there. So I always want to have like 4 to 5 people in the pit. And you just basically keep resurrecting and keep running people in there until they give up and they die and they drop their helmets and they're out. What's really great about that is it teaches people how to work as a duo, and make really fast decisions. So you'd be surprised how often, like we said right now, if you had 2-on-2, 2 shields versus 2 spears, same ability levels, who would win? We would normally expect the shields to win because they're going to have to charge the spears. You'd be surprised how often those shields turn around, they see 2 spears, and in the time it takes them to figure out what to do, the 2 spears stab them. Or I remember one time specifically, we took off this way, we came back around this way, and the spears actually stabbed the following shields on either team, and somehow we pulled a win out of our orifice.
Can I add one too?
Those are my thoughts.
And this is one that, in my opinion, is one of the best things that you can do to teach people how to move as a team and to take into account the people on either side. And the cool part about this is you can do it with brand new people and you're not limited by how many weapons you have. And that is do an entire single sword melee. Just have them take their normal single sword. And I got exposed to this down in Callantyre. They actually had a battle at Lily's that was all just single sword. And it seems silly kind of at first blush, but you have to form into lines. If you step forward to strike, you're going to get hit. It's like having a spear line, only at sword range instead of spear range. And everybody can throw a blow. Everybody should know how to block with their sword, but you have to work as a team. You have to watch who's hitting the people on either side. You can either block for them or you can take advantage when their sword's extended. You reach out and throw your strike. So it gets you to feel kind of if you imagine a side breathing in and out as they strike, they're exhaling, and as they come back, they're inhaling. You get a sense of that timing and feel of how you need to move and cover that ground. And the range is close enough that it's hot. I mean, you're only within a couple of inches of being either dead or safe. And so it gives you a feeling of that control of range, your footwork, as well as keeping an eye on what's going on next to you with your fellow fighter. And it's a hell of a lot of fun. I mean, they're just a blast.
I'm trying to picture it.
It's fantastic.
Something that I like to do, if I've got 3 or 4 brand new people, never been in a melee or anything like that, I will, if it's an odd number, I'll throw in another fighter or something like that. But I like to just put them in a line against each other, and like it's a limited front, keep them right there. Let them fight some, and then talk about it a little bit. I want them to learn where those lines are that they can hit, where those lines are that they need to block. Just that very basic stuff for them right from the beginning, and then start adding things in, like Sir Barry was saying, or Tristan was saying, where you can flank or split up or do some movement. But at least I like to get them started there, that way first, so they learn some of those lines that they need to know, where they can throw and where they need to block. And then, like you said, start showing them how to move. Start saying, hey, why don't you move? What if you move a half a step to the right? What's going to happen there? Try different things like that. And then once you're doing more of that, you can open it up, a larger floor, let them move around more. But I do like to start right there where they can learn those lines.
I am so stealing this stuff. We got melee practices this weekend. I would like to echo something Barry said. He talked about practicing putting tape on your helm, and he also talked about yelling. I will tell, but you also have to watch what's going on. I will share with you that a couple of years ago at Pennsic, I was fighting on the mid side, so I had red on my helm, and I put a lot of red on because I bring extra tape because there's always that person that forgets that they need to wear tape, so I wear extra. So I had this big band of red. I run up to this line because the mid is over there, and I'm like, Jesus, I'm hot pursuit type of thing. So I'm running up to this line with red, yelling mid, 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 because I'm on your team, you see. But just in case, mid, mid, mid. And you'd think after 30 years I would know that's not enough. I got killed by the mid side, like red, yelling, doing everything possible that I could do to say, I'm your chum. Don't smite me, fellows. Yeah, and I was like, and part of me is like, I don't want to be dead. It was a fair blow, but damn it, I'm pissed. The guy who ended up killing me was pretty chagrined. Good. So one of the things you've really got to do is pay attention. So Barry, I really like your back to back and figure out where you're going. I'd like to really support that. So Pellinore, I know in your household people frequently fight together, and I'm saying that in a silly voice. Pelly and I are in the same house, so I just like to say things, tease him a little bit. So in our household, we often have people who fight together, just their buddies, whatever. What are your thoughts on people who like I fight next to you, or these two always fight together? Do you like that? Would you rather see us, mixing it up and fighting with different people? What are your thoughts on long-term battle buddies?
Well, if you're going to a war or to an event or something, yeah, it's great having that person that you fight against a lot or fight with a lot, because as a spearman, or I'm sure as a poleman, it gives me a lot more confidence in what I can do. I can step out that half a step farther, and I know they've got my back, they've got my side. They're gonna guard me, that I may not be able to do with somebody that I don't know. But if we're at practice, you want to switch those people around. You don't want to stay. I don't like to keep people right next to each other necessarily, so that they can get that confidence with other people within the people that you're practicing with, because you need to be able to. You're not going to be beside the same person all the time at every event. You need to have that practice of just fighting with other people, even if it's just a learning to say something like, "What do you are you left-handed or right-handed?" Or just where do you like me to be on as a spearman or as a shield when you're with somebody new? And you need to practice that at practices too, because you will get shuffled around. Um, you still like to fight at practice with the guys you like, and you can do that. But I like to see people switching around also.
Tris, where do you stand on that? Battle
Well,
buddies
yeah,
or
when we started out way back in the day, there wasn't a lot of us, so we were always fighting with the same people. And what I noticed in a curve was, as I started, we would try to communicate with each other as much as possible. All right, my shieldman would say, "I'm going after this guy," and he had some wheels on him. So what I discovered as a polearm fighter, that if I didn't get going pretty quick, he'd get over there and kill somebody before I even had a chance to do it. So I had to be pretty aggressive, and I had to what I call orbit, because I'd go around either left or right, depending on where he was getting pressure. And I had to stay forward enough that I could try to get my polearm on the guy's helm before he got his sword on it. So we became a very aggressive team because both wanted to, be the ones to get the kill. But what happened was, as we both got along and got more experienced at that, we had to communicate less and less verbally because all I needed to do was lower my pole arm in front of his helm somewhere so that he could catch it in his vision, and he knew what side I was on. Those types of habits transfer when you're working with somebody that you haven't fought with before. And because some people just don't, they get so into it, they don't listen, but they will often see. And the fact that as a polearm fighter, I wasn't taking a nap in the second rank. I was actually up with them in the front. Like, my job was to make their job easier. If somebody was coming at him, I was going to make sure that they had to block a shot by the time they got into his range, or vice versa. Or if somebody was shooting at his head, I had to cover for him. As we really developed that with that one specialized person or the couple specialized people that I fought with all the time, I found it really easy to transfer that with others. Of course, there's a few those that disappoint you because they aren't fighting as a team really. They're just trying to stay alive or what have you. But I found that if I was teamed up with somebody less experienced, my doing those things made life easier for them as my teammate, and that would help get them to relax. They would start to learn, okay, there's a communication going on here, and I can understand what's happening, even though I don't have somebody yelling in my ear, go here, look there, that sort of thing. So that's what I've noticed about it. It's, of course, I like fighting with people I've got a great rapport with, and have built up over, with experience. But, I've also had tremendous experience with teaming up with, people I've not fought with ever before and just clicking because we both have a decent level of experience. And without even having to say a word, the teamwork just starts clicking into place. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah. I've been there. I've lived that. Barry, I have a question for you. One of the things that Tristan was talking about was, the shields and what are they supposed to do? So I think it's important that in any discussion of melee that we discuss who does what. So what do you view the role of a shield wall or the shields in a melee?
You said a dirty word. You said shield wall.
Yes, I did. So I'll say the shields.
I'm being very progressive. I'm actually not a shield wall fan. Yeah, shields in general. Oh God, it depends on. So are we still sticking with small team melee?
For now, yeah. Tonight's topic is smaller melee. So in a smaller melee, how do you view the role of the shields?
Okay, so my personal philosophy when we're beginning, and again, we're going to assume that it's not. There should be some sort of flexible. There's not going to be some sort of specialized scenario we're doing where we're going to go grab the sheep and throw them into a pin or something like that. If you've ever done those before. But yeah, I think the biggest value that the shields have are they sort of control the line. Okay, nobody can charge past your shields. Hopefully, your shields can keep the other people from getting to you. I think I know that Tristan and Pellinore are both fans of the spear. I don't think you're really a spear maiden, are you, Bess? More shield.
I have to leave the front line with my shield. I will be switching to spear.
Oh, okay, well then we'll throw you into our special club here then. As I tell all of the shields that I fight with, your number one job is keeping me alive, even if you have to die to do so. But it's, I think in general, it's even the spears typically, I think, get a lot more of the killing, and especially if they're archers. I mean, you absolutely want to keep your archers alive. But yeah, I kind of see them as controlling the line and controlling the flanks. So if I see, again, Tristan or Pellinore or Bess standing on a flank with a spear by themselves, again, maybe you guys all have magic voodoo that I haven't seen yet, but generally we'll say, all right, well, we have to send a shield after them and we'll take them out of the fight. And we've got the flank now. We're going to wrap around their flank. We've got a really good tactical advantage. So I generally like to see shields out in that position. So yeah, I think that in a nutshell, holding the line, keeping their shields from penetrating your line, controlling your flanks, and if you decide that you're going to press, you're now trying to wrap their flanks with your shields, or you're trying to penetrate through their line, by punching through. Or like Tristan said earlier, with like column charges. You have a column charge situation. That's going to be something for the shields. Can I go back to a point you had earlier real quick? It's coming up right now.
There it is.
Yes. So you talked about whether or not you like the battle buddy or not. And I agree with everything that Pellinore said about at bigger wars, it's nice to have the battle buddy. Particularly, we had 1 year where we had a lot of growth in our unit, and we had like 40% of our people were at their first Penzic. And so we did the buddy system. Apparently I was hard to follow is the feedback I got. But we had all of basically the newer fighters say, hey, you're going to follow Bari, you're going to follow Bess, you're going to follow Tristan, you're going to follow Pellinore, and throughout the whole battle and get some sort of idea of how to work with each other. And honestly, that was mainly just to keep them spread out so they don't clump in one section or hang in the back and not do anything or be a critical mass of people that didn't have any sort of feedback or asking questions. But once you start getting into smaller battles, I view it more as there are jobs to do rather than actual people you want to support. And so this was an actual battle we did last fall. And actually, I have the right number of people up here. It was a neat battle. We had one flag that the blue team would try to get it to the orange goal, or the orange team would try to get it to the blue goal, depending on who had the flag. And if I have the flag and you kill me, I have to drop the flag, and now you can pick it up and try to run it back to the other side. What was neat about this one is our resurrection points were actually lines on each side of the field. So imagine a soccer field, and you've got a goal on one side, a goal on the other side, and the res point for one team is going to be the north side of the field, the out of bounds line, and the res for the other side is going to be the south side. So here in this picture, I have two people coming out of the res point, and I've got this person with an axe who has a decision to make. Do I go defend the goal, which clearly the orange team is running toward with a flag, and they're about to get there, or do I run back and join my triad? And if you run back and join your triad, you lose. So this is just one example I show about how, as much as people do like their triads and working with them, once you start getting into the smaller tactical, smaller melees, you have jobs that sort of have to be done. Job number one, don't let them score. Job number two might be, if your person's about to score, go help them score. Or if the strong shield that's supporting your right flank dies, then you might need to go replace that person rather than go back and protect your triad. But once you start getting into the larger wars, I think it does start to make more sense to have a buddy or to have a triad or have people that you're used to working with, or what have you.
So, Pel, that's the Barry's got that with the shields and battle buddies. How do you view the role of what I call them reach weapons, the spears or the poles? Do you view them separately for the smaller because we're talking smaller melees, as small as say, or as large as say 20 on 20s, but not a war. So you got spears, you got poles. How do you view the role of say the pole arms or the role of the spears? Are they the same?
I don't think they're quite the same, just because of reach. They can be the same, but they don't necessarily have to be. You're gonna. I would generally put a spear where they can control like if they're in the center of a line, they can control a wide range of the line on the other side, or take advantage of it as much as they can. Pole arms, they're more versatile because they can thrust and they can cut. So I might pair them up with a spear. I might put them out on the flanks more. With the 7.5 foot pole arm, they certainly have some reach. So they're not exactly the same, but there are definitely different roles that they can be in.
What specifically say if somebody says, I really want to bring out a pole, I don't really want a spear, I want to bring out a pole, what would you say a pole fighter, what would their role be in a melee? Would they be keeping the spear guys alive? Are they supposed to be charging or flanking? How do you think you would use, as a commander, how would you use a pole versus a spear in a smaller melee?
In a smaller melee, if they're going to be the killers. In a smaller melee, you're probably not going to have a spear. Like Tristan, I think, said earlier, 10, 15 or under, unless they're a really good spear guy, you're probably not going to have one. So in a smaller melee, the pole arms are going to be your heavy weapons. They can be the killers. You can use them as killers. You can use them as suppression. if there's if you see a column charge coming, if the lines are coming together, they can be suppressing the poles on the other side and the shields. Maybe they work it with another pole arm where one's suppressing and one's killing, or vice versa, or they're both killing. So really, in a smaller melee, they are your big guns.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I do want to point out one thing that when Barry was looking or showing us his diagram, or when we were looking at Barry's diagram, there was something super important that so many fighters forget. Victory conditions, you should know what they are. It's super important to remember. I can recall a Pennsic a few years ago. The victory condition was possession of the bridge. Now I realize this is Pennsic, but it applies. There are 3 bridges. The East swept through one bridge and left nobody on the bridge. There was nobody left on the bridge. There ended up being one mid-realm fighter on the bridge. They swept across the bridge. They came flanking it around as if it was to the last man standing, but it wasn't. Victory condition was possession of the bridge. So it just so happens that in this one battle, there was one fighter who was loitering on the bridge and was awarded the point. So they said, this person owns the bridge. And the East was quite upset because they're like, well, we swept through, we killed a bunch of people. This is ridiculous. Clearly we dominated. It was a time battle. And the answer was, dude, they had possession of the bridge. Yeah, it was one fighter, but they had possession of the bridge. So
one more than you had.
Exactly. So it is super important to remember your victory conditions. If it's take a flag from here to there, if there's a hay bale or something and your flag has to be at the top, know your victory conditions. So I thank you, Barry, for that. So one of the things that we've been talking about tonight is how to have a practice and what you're doing. But I think it's super important that after you have your practices or after you've had a melee, that you and your team sit down and talk about what works and what doesn't work. And essentially, if it sucked, why did it suck? And what this can do for you. So Tristan, I'm not sure that I've heard you talk about after action or post action reviews. Have you done that in the past?
Absolutely. In fact, in my opinion, it is 100% invaluable. Like, in fact, you will have a hard time becoming a good melee fighter if you skip that part. Now, when you do it, I've found that it's helpful to remain focused on what you saw, not so much who screwed up, who screwed the pooch and didn't do what they were told to do. It can easily kind of spin into finding who to blame for the fact something didn't go well. What we found as being the most useful is, here's what I saw, here's what I noticed. I watched you, turn this corner, and I was too far behind you. I should have been up on your, up in weapons range, or, I was focused on somebody. I thought you were going to come in and flank on them, and you turned off, and I had to, kind of make do with that. But here's how we can do it better the next time. And that's always kind of that rally flag at the end of your discussions is, what are we going to do next time that is going to make this go better? And almost always it came into, oh, you just told me what you saw. I didn't see that. So how can we improve how we both look at things? And so we're seeing kind of the same thing, whether it's going to be, your fellow fighter, shouts at you, communicates what they're seeing, or you just get used to knowing what they're watching not only what's in front of you, but glancing over to see what's in front of them. Because a lot of times, I'm sure we've all felt this, you get so embroiled in something that you forget to shout out, hey, I need help over here. Hey, I'm seeing this opportunity, or, whatever it is.
Or, hey, I'm dead.
Oh, yeah, hey, I'm dead. Or, hey, I'm getting flanked. I'm getting outnumbered. I need help here. Or I've got to back up, and reminding the person next to you that you're backing up and you're leaving their flank open. So you got to pull them back so their flank isn't exposed. But those after battle briefings are important for two things. One is going over the logistics of what you did and what you didn't do. But even more importantly, that's where you build the esprit de corps. That is where you build the camaraderie between each other when you follow up and say, hey, this went really great. Or, I should have been closer next time. I got you covered. Like, you're really going to build a strong bond with the people you fight with in those moments. And yeah, you might want to go home and eat. You might be exhausted, but take the time to do that, because that part is absolutely invaluable.
Barry, in our pre-meeting or our pre-show meeting, you want one of the topics, my translation of your words, so that I know that this is not exactly how you phrased it, but how do you not have an awful practice?
I said pitfalls. I actually did say bad practice.
Okay.
Well, and again, this goes back to what Tristan had just said. Is part of the way we find this out is to have that discussion at the end of practice. One of the things we do in the East is, I've heard it called plus minus or rose and thorn. We call it postmortem. But not only do we have that discussion, but we'll have everyone stands in a circle, and every single person there gets to say one thing they liked about practice and one thing they didn't like about practice. And I know you guys covered this in that last melee episode, but one of the big things this does, at least as important as anything, is it makes everyone feel like they're being heard and that they have some sort of ownership in that practice. I've been in practices and in cultures where it was the opposite. It was one or two people in charge and everyone else was just told what to do. And you kind of felt like, you could have something else that maybe you want to be part of. And we're all geeks. Like, we're all here because we like to fight. We like to build armor. We like to sort of create our own personas and our own little twist on it. So anyway, through that, one of the things I was sort of surprised, the whole reason why we even started doing that last year in our regional practice was for that reason. I was actually surprised at how much valuable information I got out of that. So I'll give you my list of complaints that we got at the beginning of the season that we did not get at the end of the season. So we actually made our practice better. And the two big ones were disorganization and wasting time. Showing up, not knowing who's going to drive the bus that day or who's in charge. It's nice if you have a little bit of a power chain. So even if the person at the top of the chain doesn't run the practice that day, at least they're an executive decision maker. You say, hey, I would like to do this. They say, let's do it. So up here we'll have, the king and then the warlord, and then usually there's like regional commanders, and then usually from there it sort of defaults into like whatever knights show up, etc. Micromanaging the fighters. So fighters do need some instruction. They do need some feedback, especially new fighters need some of that. But I find that when you get practices where you're just like, hey, everybody, we're going to do a shield wall. Shield walls move this way. And no one's ever allowed to deviate and experiment and come up with their own ways of doing things. People don't seem to like those. Sometimes you have to do that. I find bridge battles, you kind of have to have systems down because there's only so much room to operate. If you have bad scenarios or drills, you have to have a knack for identifying if you have a bad scenario or a drill. My general rule is if you have stuff that works, stick with that for a good 70, 80% of the practice. It works, do it. And then that other 20%, try something new. Like the whole tape, stand facing each other and run around. That could have been awful. We had no idea. Turned out to work pretty well. And the first time we tried it, it was taking a little too long to pull off. Fortunately, we had a nice 75-degree day, so it wasn't so bad. But then we learned how to sort of speed that up. But at least we weren't doing that for every scenario, right? Ironic coming from me, too much talking. I know that's one of my faults. We talked about this last week. It's not just the too much talking, but the ones that got really bad for us, especially on hot days. It's worse when the days are hot because people only have so much time that they can stand in their armor. When you get a group of people together and you start saying, hey, what do you guys think about this? And then they'll comment on, oh, yes, and I like to do this. Oh, there's this one. And then you get this constant cycle of yes, and everyone's got one more thing to add on. And then 20 minutes later, you're still talking when you could be doing that online. You can be doing that at the bar later. You can be doing that on Facebook. Let me get a couple other things here. Not enough instruction or too much instruction. So we got a little bit of feedback. Sometimes I don't instruct enough. So sometimes they want to be told what to do. So I like to just throw them out and see what happens. Some people don't like that. They kind of want more like karate class. You show up, this is the way to throw a punch, now go execute it. So there's a little bit of nuance there. And then the last thing I'm going to throw in here, and I have some people in mind that are actually friends of mine and people I respect, but I will say rude and condescending knights. That's not a huge problem, but there has been, I think it's been getting better as we've sort of progressed in society in the SCA. But there have been times in the past when it was just like, I don't know, man, it's like the Knights watched too many like Braveheart movies and they really want to be William the Longshanks. And that's kind of how they ran things. And it just, and I would get, all the unbelts would sit there. What do you think about that guy? That guy's a jerk. I don't think I'm coming here next month. I don't like it when he runs things. And with that, there's a little bit of a nuance. There's some people I know that they're going to have a little bit of that method. So I try to butter them up, especially now that I'm, a knighted. And even before I kind of like work myself in a place where people respected me a little bit. And I'll sort of head it off ahead of time, or I'll even say like, hey, we're going to play good cop, bad cop. He's going to be the bad cop, just to kind of soften the blow a little bit because, people don't show up to get yelled at. But I also have seen some people usually with military backgrounds that, or like a football coaching background that know how to do the yelling, but it's like motivational yelling, not you guys are stupid, you did it wrong again, that kind of thing. So those are some thoughts I had there.
Thank you. I think those are terrific.
Thank you.
Actually, you made a point that I think that's super important for all of us to remember. We are not the military. So the reality is you're going to tell somebody to go right and they're going to go left. And we got to be prepared for that. I'm very conscious of the time. Sir Barry is actually off to Ethel Mark's Adult Swim tonight as soon as we finish. So we've had some questions that we have not been able to get to in so far tonight. So Tristan is going to answer your questions and then we're going to sign off so Barry can hit the road and arrive at a good time. So Tristan, you know the questions that we've got, and so you're up with the viewer questions for tonight.
Sure thing. And we got to these, and I'll say with both of these are personal in nature, the answers. They're not universal truths. So maybe we can have everybody go through what their answers would be. But these are good questions, so I wanted to address them here. And the first one is, if you had to pick just one, which would your top one best teammate trait be? And I would say that they are a heads-up team player. And that is that they're assertive. They're never standing around kind of looking at the sky and, scratching their butt. They're of the where do I... They should always be where can I be of most use and how can I be of use to my teammates. And I'll say this too. I actually prefer green fighters, newer ones that are eager and will listen, oftentimes to more seasoned ones that'll just say, I'm going to do what I want to do because I know better anyway. Those guys tend to be hot sticks, but oftentimes they're not good team players. So to me, the team player is the big one. Any of you have comments on how you would answer that question?
I have to agree. A team player works really well. And if they can listen to what you're saying and be able to tell you what they think needs to be done in a certain situation, that's a bonus.
Yeah,
they don't need to be the hottest stick out there, but they have to be a team.
As a matter of, I'm like you. A lot of times, if we have green fighters and we don't want to fill a line with them, I'll take one as my shield man and I run him around in front of me as a spear, and we just have a good time, and he learns a lot.
Barry?
Yep.
Well, I agree with you guys, and I'll say that. So I met the person, and I can't remember. Oh, Twig, I think is what he goes by. New fighter, has been fighting maybe 5 or 6 months. I got to practice with him about a month ago, and I'll throw this out to John. What you guys described fits his personality perfectly. So I hope that he really enjoys. Yeah, we got the heart there. I hope he really enjoys hearing that. Yeah, that's exactly. He's a new fighter, and I remember a couple of times he came up to me. He was like, "Hey, what would you like a shield to do in this situation?" And was very conscientious. And that's what we were looking for is team players. and we talked about that before when where you guys talked about that last time, when the melee is the great equalizer. So it doesn't matter if you're the newest or worst person on the field. It's our group of people versus their group of people, and everyone's got a job to do. And and your job is to do the best you can at whatever job needs to be done.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
There was one other
Bess,
question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I want to hear your answer to that question. What trait? Yeah. You know your stuff.
Not a glory hound. And that's just it. It's somebody who's a team player, someone who's not willing to, who's willing to do their job. They may not get all the kills, but they're solid, reliable people. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes keeping somebody else alive, I'll say this, in our household, when we're fighting, it's easy for the spear walker. I go, man, I got 95 kills. What did you get, Shield? And I'm like, I got none because I kept you alive, bastard. Mm-hmm. So what we do is we share the kills. So if somebody gets 90, you got 45, I got 45, because you wouldn't have got them if I wasn't with you. And I think that's super important. It has to be somebody. You have to have somebody who's willing to work as a team. So no glory hounds for this cowboy. There was one other question, and it came up with regards to poles in the melees. Do you guys prefer 6 or 7.5 foot poles? So what is your preference?
I guess I'll jump in first. I started when 6 foot was the max before the 7.5 footers came into play. And Pellinore hit it right on the head. The polearm is the most versatile weapon on the battlefield. It doesn't mean it's the best one. It just means it's the one that's the most adaptable. Now, when it comes to 6 or 7.5, I really like the 7.5 footer. It's basically with enough skill, you can hang in a 9 foot spear duel with them, but yet you can turn into a threshing machine with shields. It's a fantastic support weapon, and if with at least a bit of skill with it, you can fight one-on-one as well if you have to. Obviously, we don't want to. We'd rather fight as support for other team members. But when you know how that weapon works, you can complement spears, you can complement shields, you can even just stack up with other polearms and just become a terrifying porcupine that people don't want to get near. And you can make them pay for coming near you with it. So, but 6 or 7.5, I'd take 7.5 if I get the choice, unless there's some sort of remarkable scenario where you're crammed in tight, then I'd go with a 6. But other than that, the longer the better.
Barry?
Yeah, I actually like to interject on that. So that comes up a lot, and it took me a long time to figure this out. You don't have to choose between 6 or 7.5. I fight with a 6'8" polearm.
There you go.
Yeah, that option's in there too. My personal opinion, and again, it depends on the person. It might depend on how strong you are or what your specific technique is. I find 7.5. I'm going to define this for me. 7.5 foot polearm is a spear that can bail you out of trouble if somebody rushes you. That's the way I think about it. A 6 footer is really almost more like a greatsword. It's more of a hacking weapon. And then I find, for me personally, the 6'8" kind of gives me a happy balance between the two of them. I can thrust with it. I give up about, 6, 8 times. Give me up 10 inches of range over the 7.5 foot ones. I can choke up on it just a little bit, and I can swing it about as well as a 6 footer. And I know a lot of people that also use about that 6'6", 6'8" range. But again, it all depends. I mean, I could run into Tristan's household and they've all got 7.5 foot pole arms, and I'm like, oh wow, I never realized how inadequate my 6'8" was.
And most of us are over 6'4" tall. So
yeah, well, there's that too. Yes, I mean I'm 6'3", so it might depend on how tall you are too.
Shut up, this 5'4" person says. Hell, what about you?
I'm 5'7".
Yay!
So I like the reach. I got to go along with what Tristan said completely. I went to an event once and I was told it was all singles, so I just took 6 foot spears with me. No, didn't take a 9 foot. They had melees, so here I am in a melee with a 6 foot spear. I got run down a lot. Let's just say that. But yeah, in most melees, you want the reach. I don't know how many times I've been spearing and somebody with a 7.5 foot pole arm is just knocking my spear down, and their spears are more effective for it.
And they're faster in the tip.
Yeah.
Unless the pole arm's built as a brick, like if it's a super heavy one. But
right,
yeah.
exactly. So I'm right there with Tristan.
Well,
and I want to throw in a little bonus answer too, because this reminded me when Barry talked about the 6'8" pole arm. When the 12-foot spears came in, I'm sorry, but Barry did. When the 12-foot spears came in, of course, I ran right out and got a set of them. What I found out was the 12-footer is so slow and clumsy that it handles like a cement truck on a NASCAR track.
And it tires you out.
It tires you out. The range is great, but a child can see that tip coming. It is so slow and heavy. But when I cut it down to 10.5 feet, it was almost as agile as a 9-footer. And that extra 1.5 feet was, it was like a license to steal. In fact, I kind of felt guilty whenever I'd bring it out because it just like, oh my God, we'd have to like kind of do what you do with archers is count up. Okay, how many of you guys have more than 9-foot spears? We're not going to have, we're going to leave them back just to make sure that things are even. But yeah, you can have a weapon that's too long or slow or clumsy, and that you want to avoid.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your thoughts. Barry, we're going to get you on the road. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. As always, I appreciate all that you have to say. Pellinore, you are a joy to have and to talk, and I'm sure that we'll be doing more melees. I know we'll be discussing it. So if you guys who are watching tonight have questions or comments, or there's something you'd like us to elaborate on in future melee episodes, please let me know, or any of us. I'm here on Facebook. I'm Bess Mortimer. Next week we have our episode is Heroes and Traditions. It'll be Kaid Part 2, and I'm sure you'll all enjoy Al-Anon's talk about that. In the meantime, have a super weekend. Have fun if you're going to Adult Swim. Drive safely, everybody. Good night.
Good night,
Night,
everybody.
everyone.
Thanks a lot.